I never imagined a simple no parking could escalate into a full-blown confrontation with someone who thought they owned the world. But that morning, as I was sipping my coffee on the porch, the sound of tires crunching on my gravel driveway shattered the quiet. At first, I thought it was a delivery, maybe a neighbor dropping by. Then I saw her. HOA Karen. The woman who made everyone in the neighborhood roll their eyes the moment she stepped out of her car. Karen had that look, high heels clicking, sunglasses reflecting the sun like armor, and a smirk that spelled trouble. She parked her oversized SUV smack in the middle of my farm entrance, as if she had some invisible key to my property. And right then, I knew I had a decision to make: let her take over or set boundaries. I walked up to her, keeping my tone calm, but firm. "Karen," I said, "this is private property. You can't park here." She laughed. A laugh dripping with entitlement. "Oh, come on," she said. "It's just for a few minutes. No one will notice." I shook my head, trying not to let irritation show. "Karen, I own this land. You cannot park here." Her face tightened. Then came the words I had half expected. "Fine. I'll call the cops." There it was. The ultimate threat, like she was used to bending people with the mere mention of law enforcement. I paused, letting the weight of her words sink in, and then I smiled. Because here's the twist she didn't know: I am law enforcement. In fact, I'm the sheriff. And in this very moment, the person she thought would be powerless to stop her was the one with the badge, authority, and legal backing to enforce the law. Karen's smirk faltered. She didn't notice the glint of my sheriff's badge, the one I now pinned to my chest, just a subtle flick of metal that would shift the balance entirely. She lifted her phone, fingers poised, ready to summon backup. But she had no idea she was about to face a law she couldn't intimidate. This wasn't going to be just a warning, it was going to be a lesson in boundaries, consequences, and a showdown she'd never forget. Little did she know, the next few minutes would completely unravel her confidence, and she wouldn't know what hit her. Karen froze for a second, her phone still raised, as if expecting the world to bend to her command. That moment of hesitation was all I needed to assert control. I stepped closer, my boots crunching on the gravel, the badge gleaming in the sunlight. The realization slowly dawned on her: the person she thought she could bully was the sheriff. Her eyes widened. For the first time, I saw vulnerability, a crack in the armor of entitlement she wore like armor every day. She lowered the phone slightly, lips pressed into a tight line. "Wait, you're the sheriff," she stammered. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. "And this is my property. You cannot park here." Karen's mind raced. She had faced complaints before, had maneuvered people with authority figures in the past, but she had never faced someone like me. Someone who didn't just have the law behind them, but the absolute right to enforce it personally. Her usual tactics, bullying, threats, intimidation, suddenly seemed small, powerless, even laughable. She tried a new angle. "Look, I'm just here briefly, you don't need to make this a big deal." I shook my head slowly. "Karen, the moment you park on someone else's property without permission, it is a big deal. Especially when you ignore clear boundaries." Her jaw tightened. She clearly thought she could charm or confuse me. But I had handled people like Karen for years, managing disputes, navigating entitlement, and standing firm when no one else would. She wasn't dealing with a random neighbor. She was dealing with the law, in uniform and unafraid to enforce it. A bead of sweat ran down her temple, betraying her cool facade. She opened her mouth, trying to find another threat, a line that would give her leverage. But nothing came. Her mind was scrambling, panic setting in. Then she tried a final gambit. "Fine. I'll call the cops." I let out a low chuckle, shaking my head. "You are the cops." And you're on private property without permission. If you try anything, I will issue a citation myself." The color drained from her face. All her rehearsed arguments, her imagined victories, dissolved in a single moment. The person who had always bent to authority was now staring at authority itself. In that silence, the weight of her choices settled over her. She realized that this was not a simple parking dispute. This was a test and she was losing. I could see the wheels turning in her head, calculating, second-guessing, panicking. But I wasn't just going to intimidate her. I had to teach a lesson, one that would stick, that would remind her there are lines she cannot cross, even when she thinks she can. And that lesson was about to begin. Karen's hands trembled slightly as she put her phone back in her purse, but her pride wouldn't let her retreat. She straightened her shoulders, trying to summon the air of authority she always wielded, even when it didn't exist. "You think just because you're the sheriff you can scare me," she spat, attempting defiance. I raised an eyebrow, calm and measured. "No, Karen. I think you'll respect the law. And right now, the law says you cannot park on private property without permission." Her lips tightened. She was used to people backing down when she raised her voice or called for help. But now, she was on my farm, facing a person who carried a badge, a gun, and the authority to enforce every word I said. This wasn't just a warning anymore, it was a full test of character, boundaries, and consequences. Karen took a step forward, as if sheer arrogance could push me off my land. "I'm not moving until—" "Until what?" I interrupted, my voice firm. "Until you're ready to accept responsibility for trespassing? Because you are trespassing, Karen." Her face flushed red with frustration. She opened her mouth, searching for an excuse, a loophole, anything that could give her the upper hand. But there was nothing. No clause in her HOA handbook could override my authority. No imagined right could let her park where she pleased. I could see her panic starting to creep in. The bravado, the confidence, the smug superiority all slipping away with each passing second. She glanced around nervously, as if expecting a crowd to back her up. But this was my farm. My rules. My control. "I suggest you move your vehicle now," I said, taking a deliberate step closer to her SUV. "Or I will have to enforce the law directly." Her hands tightened on the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She wanted to yell, to argue, to call someone, anyone to save her from this humiliation. But she was trapped. The irony was delicious. The woman who wielded power over neighbors now faced the authority she thought she could manipulate. Finally, after a long pause, she sighed and stepped out of the vehicle. Every movement screamed reluctance, but she knew there was no winning here. I watched as she backed her SUV away, slowly, each inch a small victory for law and order, a small defeat for entitlement. When she stopped, I nodded once, simply, letting her know the situation was resolved, for now. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Karen's ego wouldn't let it rest quietly. She would come back, scheming, plotting. And I would be ready. This was only the beginning. A single parking dispute had escalated into a personal battle of wills, and both of us were playing high-stakes chess without realizing it. I thought the parking incident had ended with her SUV retreating down the gravel path. But Karen never plays fair or quietly accepts defeat. By mid-afternoon, whispers reached me from neighbors. Karen was already making calls, plotting her next move. She wasn't going to let a single no slide. She needed revenge, attention, and validation. I stayed on the porch, watching my farm stretch into the horizon, but I was alert. Every rustle in the trees, every approaching vehicle made me tense. I knew Karen, she thrives on escalation. And sure enough, within hours, she appeared again, this time with a stack of papers in hand and a look that could curdle milk. "Legal notices," she called out before stepping onto my property, waving the papers like weapons. You're violating HOA regulations. You can't just. I raised my hand, stopping her mid-rant. Karen, let me stop you right there. This is private property, and none of your HOA regulations apply here. None. Her face contorted with disbelief. That's impossible. The HOA has authority over this land. I shook my head, smiling under my hat. Actually, no. You've got it all wrong. The only authority here is mine. And if you don't leave, I can issue a citation and have you removed myself. Her eyes darted to the badge I casually displayed on my belt. Panic crept in, but so did determination. Karen never backs down. She had a plan, and she wasn't about to let logic ruin it. She raised her voice even louder, hoping neighbors would hear, hoping to rally support, hoping to intimidate. But that was her mistake. The moment you escalate a dispute with the sheriff, the rules change. I didn't need approval from anyone, and I didn't need backup. My calm, steady presence was authority enough. She shoved the papers toward me, trembling slightly, clearly expecting me to be overwhelmed. But I took them, glanced at the legal jargon, and smirked. Interesting, I said. But none of this holds water on my property. You're trespassing again, Karen. Her jaw dropped. She realized she'd underestimated me not just as the property owner, but as law enforcement. Her confidence faltered. I could see the gears turning in her mind, trying to find a loophole that didn't exist. And in that instant, I understood something crucial. This wasn't just about parking anymore. It was about ego, control, and proving who's in charge. Karen had stepped into a game she couldn't win, and every move she made only tightened the grip of consequences around her. Little did she know. I was ready to turn this confrontation into a lesson she would never forget. Karen wasn't the type to retreat quietly. After the papers, after the public display, she returned with renewed determination. By mid-morning the next day, she appeared at my farm again, this time with a small entourage of HOA members in tow. They walked confidently, like they owned the place, cameras and phones ready to record any injustice they imagined. I didn't flinch. I knew exactly what this was: intimidation, spectacle, an attempt to pressure me into submission. But Karen had misjudged one critical factor: I don't get intimidated, and I don't play by their rules. My farm, my land, my authority. And as sheriff, my patience had limits. Karen waved her arms dramatically, pointing at the farmhouse. You can't just ignore the HOA. This is harassment. We have rights. I stepped forward, keeping my voice steady, projecting calm authority. Karen, your rights don't extend here. This is private property. You are trespassing. Step off, or I will take action. The entourage exchanged uneasy glances. Karen, however, tried to rally them, using her usual tactics: loud words, exaggerated gestures, and threats of lawsuits. But their confidence wavered when they saw my badge, my stance, the certainty in my voice. I continued, measured and deliberate: everyone here is trespassing. I suggest you leave before I have to enforce the law. This isn't a suggestion, it's a warning. Her smirk faltered. She tried to argue again, but I interrupted calmly: let me make this simple: your parking dispute, your HOA regulations, your threats, none of it applies here. You are on private land without permission, and the sheriff enforces the law on this property. The tension was palpable. You could cut it with a knife. The cameras rolled, the neighbors peeked from behind fences, and Karen's voice grew desperate. But I remained unshaken. Then, I made the move that shifted the entire dynamic. I walked toward her, slowly, deliberately, ensuring my badge caught the light. Move your vehicle. Leave my property. Now. Karen's eyes widened. The moment had arrived. Her entire plan to intimidate, to pressure, to dominate collapsed in a heartbeat. She realized she was trapped in a situation where her usual tactics were powerless. Slowly, reluctantly, she gestured for the entourage to back away. She would have to retreat. She would have to plan again, plot again, and think twice before stepping onto my land. And I would be ready, every single time. This wasn't just about a parking dispute anymore, it was about authority, consequences, and respect. Karen was learning, the hard way, that some battles cannot be won through entitlement, arrogance, or theatrics. And as I watched her leave, I knew the storm wasn't over. The next move would be hers, but she had no idea the full force of law and experience she was up against. I thought Karen would retreat, lick her wounds, and reconsider her approach. I underestimated her. By the next morning, she was back, this time, quieter, calculating, her moves far more dangerous than before. She didn't come with an entourage or blaring threats. She came alone, armed with paperwork, cameras, and a plan that relied on deception rather than confrontation. She parked just outside the main entrance to my farm, claiming she was visiting a friend. The audacity alone was shocking, but I had learned long ago to read between the lines. Her posture, the way she scanned the property, the subtle tightening of her jaw, it all screamed manipulation. Karen wasn't here for friendliness. She was setting a trap. I approached her calmly, keeping my distance but making sure my presence was undeniable. "Karen," I said, "this is private property. Step off immediately." She smiled, a false, honeyed smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm just walking through," she said, waving a hand vaguely. "I won't be long. Don't want trouble." Trouble. That word alone made me tense. I knew her tactics: petty harassment, slow escalation, trying to provoke a reaction that could be spun as aggression. She wanted to claim victimhood. She wanted to get me in trouble. But she forgot one thing: I'm the sheriff, and I know exactly how to read this kind of behavior. I calmly positioned myself between her and the central area of the farm. "Karen, this isn't a casual walk. You are on private property. Step back or I will enforce the law." Her smile faltered, replaced with a flash of panic. But then, like a fox circling its prey, she tried another move. She reached for her phone, gesturing as if filming me, hoping to twist perception, hoping neighbors or social media could back her false narrative. I shook my head slowly. "Go ahead. Record all you want. But it won't change the facts. Trespassing, harassment, intimidation, it's all on you. And I'm fully prepared to document it, too." Her lips pressed together. She realized the tables had turned completely. My calm, steady presence, combined with absolute authority, neutralized every manipulative tactic she had rehearsed. Karen's mind raced. She needed a win, some leverage, any advantage. But I stood firm, unwavering. She had underestimated me from the beginning, and now, with every passing second, she understood the price of that miscalculation. This wasn't over, though. Karen was relentless, and she wasn't going to give up until she forced a reaction. But I was ready. Every eventuality had been considered, and my patience, though tested, was unbreakable. Next, Karen would escalate in ways she thought clever, but I had already anticipated her moves. And the moment she made her next mistake, I would be ready to strike with authority. Karen's subtle escalation wasn't just about trespassing anymore, it was about control, intimidation, and trying to manipulate the system. By now, I had realized she had one goal: create chaos that looked like my fault. She wanted a scenario she could spin as harassment or abuse of authority. But she had overlooked a crucial detail: I am the sheriff, and I know the law inside and out. That afternoon, she returned yet again, this time carrying what appeared to be a stack of official documents. As she waved them toward me, I could see the pride in her eyes. She thought she had the legal upper hand. "You see, she began, her voice dripping with false authority. The HOA has every right to issue citations and enforce regulations. You're violating my rights. I calmly examined the papers, flipping through them with a quiet confidence that immediately deflated her performance. Karen, interesting, I said slowly, my tone deliberate. But none of these apply to this property. You've been misinformed, and now you're trespassing while trying to enforce regulations that don't exist here. Her eyes narrowed, disbelief etched on her face. That's impossible, she gasped. I have the documents. This proves. I held up a hand. Karen, I've handled your type before. I know the tactics. You've been trying to manipulate perception, create a story that casts me as the villain. But your entire plan fails because the law is on my side. On my property, I enforce the law. And right now, you are violating it. Her face flushed red, a mix of anger and panic. She realized her scheme was collapsing. The documents she thought would intimidate me were useless. Her legal trap had backfired, and she was caught in her own web. I continued, calm but firm, step off my property immediately. Any further attempts to manipulate, intimidate, or trespass will result in a formal citation, arrest if necessary, and documentation that could affect your HOA standing. Do you understand? She hesitated. Her mind raced, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. I could see the storm of frustration and fear behind her carefully constructed facade. Karen had underestimated me from the very start, and the reality of that mistake was settling in. Finally, she took a small step back, muttering something under her breath, clearly shaken. The legal tactic she had believed would corner me had not only failed, it had revealed just how outmatched she was. This was no longer a parking dispute. It was a confrontation of wills, of authority, and Karen was learning the hard way that arrogance meets consequences when she steps onto someone else's property. And as she retreated yet again, I knew the end game was approaching. She had one more move left, one last desperate attempt that could either humiliate her or trigger a full showdown she wasn't ready for. Karen returned the next morning with the look of a woman who had exhausted all subtle tactics and had decided it was time for a full-blown showdown. Her usual smug confidence was mixed with desperation. She was out of options, out of tricks, and painfully aware that she was facing someone who could not be intimidated. This time, she didn't come alone, but her entourage was smaller, more hesitant. It was clear they were only here because Karen demanded it, and the air of uncertainty made her overcompensate. She strode onto my property with determination, waving her arms like she was leading an army, but there was a tremor in her voice. I'm done with the games, she announced. You cannot treat me this way. The HOA has rights, and you. I raised a hand, stopping her mid-rant. Karen, I have explained everything. You've trespassed, threatened, and attempted to manipulate the situation. I am the law here, and I enforce it. Step back, or I will take further action. Her smirk wavered, replaced by frustration. She tried one last tactic. She lifted her phone high, intending to film me and spin the narrative online. Everyone is going to see this. You can't do this. I remained calm, unshaken. Record all you want. The law is clear. Trespassing and harassment are on you. And I will document it as well. Her panic started to show, but she forced herself to speak through it. You're abusing your power. This isn't fair. I took a step closer, letting my badge glint in the morning sun. Karen, fairness isn't about bending the law to suit your ego. Fairness is following rules, respecting boundaries, and understanding consequences. You chose to ignore all three. Her entourage began to whisper among themselves, some turning away, sensing the situation had shifted entirely. Karen's facade crumbled further. She realized her last-ditch effort, the final escalation she had counted on, was ineffective against someone who knew every angle, every legal loophole, and who could enforce consequences instantly. Finally, she muttered something inaudible, hesitated, and reluctantly began to back off. The SUV moved slowly down the gravel driveway, the hum of the engine drowning out the tension that had filled the air moments before. I watched her go, knowing that her ego was bruised, her confidence shattered, and her plans undone. This wasn't just about parking anymore. It was about authority, boundaries, and the consequences of challenging someone who knows the law and owns the land inside and out. Karen had learned the hard way that intimidation doesn't work on everyone, and some people don't just enforce the law, they embody it. And her final mistake? She had underestimated me. The stage was set for the conclusion. One final move remained, and it would determine whether Karen learned her lesson or escalated one last time into chaos. Karen's retreat was temporary. By mid-afternoon, she returned once more, desperate and fueled by ego. This time, it wasn't about subtlety or intimidation, it was about one final attempt to reclaim control, to win the battle she had already lost in every sense. She stormed onto my property, waving her phone like a banner of victory she imagined she could claim. Her entourage had shrunk even further, a silent acknowledgement that her credibility was crumbling. "This ends now," she shouted. "You can't keep me from." I stepped forward, calm and deliberate, the badge on my chest reflecting sunlight like a symbol of authority. "Karen," I said, voice steady and firm, "enough. You have trespassed repeatedly. You have attempted to manipulate the law. You have harassed me and my property. Your options are over. Leave now or face the consequences." She froze, realizing for the first time that this wasn't about bluffing. I was the law, and the law was absolute here. Her eyes darted around, looking for allies, witnesses, anything that could save her. But there was no one. She was alone. Then came the final misstep. In frustration, she leaned on the gate of my farm, trying to assert dominance. I moved closer, my voice calm but unyielding. "Karen, step away from my property. That's an order." She hesitated. Pride warred with reality. Then, with a flustered sigh, she straightened, muttered something under her breath, and slowly walked back to her SUV. I watched, unblinking, as she backed the vehicle down the driveway and finally left. Her defeat was complete, not physically harmed, but publicly, legally, and psychologically. She had lost every battle she had tried to fight on my land. As the dust settled, I took a deep breath, surveying my farm. Every boundary had been reinforced, every authority established, and every threat neutralized. This wasn't about ego or vengeance, it was about ensuring respect for property, law, and fairness. Karen's actions had tested limits, but the result was clear: some lines cannot be crossed without consequences. Neighbors peeked from behind fences, their expressions a mix of relief and awe. Some whispered about Karen's arrogance, others about the power of standing firm. But the lesson was unmistakable. Authority, patience, and clarity of action always outweigh entitlement and intimidation. I knew one thing for certain: Karen had learned, the hard way, that the law is not a tool to manipulate but a shield to protect, and when challenged by someone who understands it fully, even the most audacious opponents will falter. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I walked the edges of my farm, feeling the quiet strength of control restored. Karen's saga had ended not with drama, but with justice, firm and undeniable. And one thing was clear: on my property, I set the rules, and the law always backs the one who knows how to enforce them. The storm was over. The lesson was learned. And peace returned to the farm.